Question 1. During the evaluation of an application for an Iowa non-resident professional permit to carry weapons, what is the most critical step to ensure compliance with Iowa Code Chapter 724? Option A. Verifying the applicant's valid permit from their home state and confirming it is recognized by Iowa, alongside a thorough review of the application for completeness and accuracy against all Iowa statutory eligibility requirements for non-resident applicants. Option B. Focusing solely on the applicant's criminal background check, assuming other aspects of the application are secondary if the background is clear. Option C. Accepting the applicant's word that they meet all Iowa requirements, provided they possess a valid permit from their state of residence. Option D. Expediting the review process by overlooking minor administrative errors on the application, such as an incomplete section on training. Correct answer is A. Verifying the applicant's valid permit from their home state and confirming it is recognized by Iowa, alongside a thorough review of the application for completeness and accuracy against all Iowa statutory eligibility requirements for non-resident applicants. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a non-resident applicant for an Iowa professional permit to carry weapons to navigate the specific application requirements and understand the implications of holding such a permit. The challenge lies in ensuring all necessary documentation is accurate, complete, and submitted in accordance with Iowa Code Chapter 724, specifically focusing on the provisions for non-resident permits. Misunderstanding or misrepresenting information can lead to application denial, revocation of a permit, or even criminal penalties. Careful judgment is required to interpret the statutory language and apply it to the applicant's specific circumstances. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly reviewing the applicant's submitted documentation against the requirements outlined in Iowa Code Chapter 724 for non-resident permits. This includes verifying the applicant's state of residence, ensuring their permit from their home state is valid and recognized by Iowa, and confirming that all required application forms are completed accurately and truthfully. The applicant must demonstrate they meet the eligibility criteria as defined by Iowa law, such as not being disqualified due to felony convictions, domestic abuse convictions, or other disqualifying factors specified in the code. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the statutory mandate for issuing permits, ensuring that only eligible individuals receive them, and that the process is conducted with integrity and in full compliance with Iowa's legal framework. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that a valid permit from another state automatically qualifies an applicant for an Iowa non-resident permit without verifying specific Iowa Code requirements. This fails to acknowledge that Iowa has its own distinct eligibility criteria and application procedures that must be met, regardless of reciprocity agreements. Another incorrect approach is to overlook minor discrepancies in the application, such as an incomplete address or a missing signature, believing they are insignificant. Iowa law requires strict adherence to application procedures, and such omissions can be grounds for denial or later revocation. Finally, an approach that relies solely on the applicant's verbal assurances without independently verifying the validity and recognition of their home state permit or confirming all statutory eligibility requirements is also professionally unacceptable. This bypasses the due diligence necessary to uphold the integrity of the permitting process. Professional reasoning. Professionals evaluating applications for Iowa non-resident permits to carry weapons must adopt a systematic and diligent approach. This involves 1. Understanding the specific statutory requirements of Iowa Code Chapter 724, particularly those pertaining to non-resident permits. 2. Conducting a comprehensive review of all submitted documentation, cross-referencing it with the legal requirements. 3. Verifying the validity and recognition of the applicant's home state permit. 4. Ensuring all eligibility criteria are met, free from any disqualifying factors. 5. Maintaining meticulous records of the evaluation process. This structured approach ensures legal compliance, upholds public safety, and maintains the credibility of the permitting authority. Question 2. Research into the process for obtaining a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons in Iowa reveals that an applicant must demonstrate a specific need tied to their professional duties. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework for securing such a permit in Iowa? Option A. submitting a detailed application that includes proof of employment within Iowa, a letter from their employer on company letterhead explaining the nature of the business and the specific professional reasons necessitating the carrying of a weapon for protection while performing duties in Iowa, and confirmation of meeting all other eligibility criteria under Iowa law. Option B, providing a general statement of needing to protect oneself while traveling through Iowa for business purposes, assuming that a valid permit from their home state is sufficient. Option C, submitting an application that vaguely describes the employer's business and omits specific details about why carrying a weapon is essential for their professional activities in Iowa. Option D, relying on a verbal assurance from their employer that carrying a weapon is necessary, without providing any written documentation or formal employer letter. The correct answer is A, submitting a detailed application that includes proof of employment within Iowa, a letter from their employer on company letterhead explaining the nature of the business and the specific professional reasons necessitating the carrying of a weapon for protection while performing duties in Iowa, and confirmation of meeting all other eligibility criteria under Iowa law. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a non-resident applicant to navigate the specific requirements of Iowa law for obtaining a professional permit to carry weapons, ensuring compliance with both federal and state regulations while demonstrating a legitimate need for the permit. The applicant must accurately represent their situation and provide sufficient evidence to satisfy the issuing authority. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding of Iowa Code, Chapter 724, specifically the provisions related to non-resident permits and the definition of professional purposes. This approach requires the applicant to meticulously gather documentation proving their employment within Iowa, the nature of their duties that necessitate carrying a weapon for protection, and their employer's authorization. This includes obtaining a letter from their employer detailing the business operations in Iowa and the specific reasons why carrying a weapon is essential for their professional responsibilities. Furthermore, the applicant must ensure they meet all other eligibility criteria outlined in Iowa law, such as age, residency in their home state, and absence of disqualifying criminal history. This comprehensive and accurate submission directly addresses the statutory requirements for a non-resident professional permit, demonstrating a legitimate need and adherence to Iowa's regulatory framework. An incorrect approach would be to submit an application that relies solely on a general statement of needing to protect oneself while traveling through Iowa for business, without specific documentation of employment within the state or a demonstrated professional need directly tied to their work activities in Iowa. This fails to meet the professional purposes requirement as defined by Iowa law, which necessitates a direct link between the carrying of a weapon and the applicant's employment within the state. Another incorrect approach would be to submit an application that omits the employer's letter or provides a vague description of the employer's business, as this lacks the specific evidence required to corroborate the professional need. This failure to provide substantiating documentation undermines the credibility of the application and its compliance with the spirit and letter of Iowa's permitting process. Finally, an approach that assumes reciprocity with their home state's permit without verifying Iowa's specific non-resident permit requirements would be fundamentally flawed, as each state has its own distinct laws governing the issuance of such permits. Professionals should approach such applications by first consulting the most current Iowa Code, specifically Chapter 724, and any accompanying administrative rules or guidance from the Iowa Department of Public Safety. They should then meticulously document their professional role and the specific reasons why carrying a weapon is essential for their work within Iowa, securing all necessary employer attestations and supporting evidence. This structured, evidence-based approach ensures all legal requirements are met and demonstrates a clear, justifiable need for the permit. Question 3. Governance review demonstrates a need to assess the process for issuing non-resident professional permits to carry weapons in Iowa. An applicant presents a valid permit to carry firearms issued by their home state of Illinois. What is the most appropriate action to ensure compliance with Iowa's non-resident permit requirements? Option A. Issue the non-resident permit based solely on the presentation of a valid permit from another U.S. state. Option B. Proceed with issuing the permit, assuming that if Illinois issues permits, they meet Iowa's standards. Option C. Contact the Illinois State Police to inquire about the general reciprocity of firearm permits between Illinois and Iowa. Option D. Verify that the applicant's Illinois permit is recognized by Iowa and that the applicant is not otherwise disqualified under Iowa Code Chapter 724. The correct answer is D. Verify that the applicant's Illinois permit is recognized by Iowa and that the applicant is not otherwise disqualified under Iowa Code Chapter 724. Explanation: Governance review demonstrates a need to ensure compliance with Iowa's non-resident professional permit to carry weapons regulations. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a thorough understanding of the specific requirements for a non-resident to legally carry a handgun in Iowa, particularly when the applicant's primary residence is outside the state. Misinterpreting or overlooking these requirements can lead to serious legal consequences for both the applicant and the entity processing the application. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between valid applications and those that fail to meet Iowa's statutory criteria. The best professional practice involves meticulously verifying that the applicant meets all statutory requirements for a non-resident permit as outlined in Iowa Code Chapter 724. This includes confirming the applicant possesses a valid permit to carry weapons issued by their home state or jurisdiction, that their home state's permit is recognized by Iowa, and that they are not otherwise disqualified under Iowa law. This approach ensures adherence to the specific provisions governing non-resident permits, safeguarding against violations of Iowa's firearm regulations, and upholding the integrity of the permitting process. Failing to confirm the applicant's valid permit from their home state is a significant regulatory failure. Iowa Code 724:11 specifically addresses permits issued by other states and requires that the applicant possess a valid permit from their resident state. Without this verification, the non-resident permit cannot be lawfully issued. Another incorrect approach is to assume that a permit from any other state automatically qualifies an applicant for a non-resident permit in Iowa. Iowa Code 724:11 requires that the applicant's home state permit be recognized by Iowa. This recognition is not automatic and depends on reciprocity agreements or specific statutory provisions. Finally, neglecting to assess whether the applicant is disqualified under Iowa law, such as by age, criminal history, or other factors outlined in Iowa Code Chapter 724, represents a critical ethical and regulatory lapse. The non-resident permit process is not merely about having a permit from another state. It also mandates that the applicant be eligible to possess a permit under Iowa's own laws. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes statutory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying the specific regulatory framework, Iowa Code Chapter 724 for non-resident permits. 2. Analyzing the applicant's documentation against each explicit requirement of that framework. 3. Seeking clarification or additional documentation when any requirement is unclear or incomplete. 4. Documenting the verification process thoroughly to demonstrate due diligence. Question 4. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a rigorous review of out-of-state training for non-resident professional permit to carry weapons applicants in Iowa is essential. When evaluating an applicant from Illinois who holds a valid concealed carry permit and has completed a firearms training course in that state, what is the most appropriate course of action for the Iowa Issuing Authority to ensure compliance with Iowa Code Chapter 724? Option A. Request and thoroughly review the applicant's Illinois firearms training certificate and curriculum details to verify it meets or exceeds the training requirements specified in Iowa Code Section 724:9, including handgun proficiency, firearm safety, and legal aspects of carrying a weapon. Option B. Automatically approve the Iowa non-resident professional permit based on the applicant's valid Illinois concealed carry permit, assuming reciprocity covers all training requirements. Option C. Deny the application outright because the training was completed in Illinois and not in Iowa, regardless of the training content. Option D. Accept a verbal confirmation from the applicant that their Illinois training covered all necessary topics without requiring any official documentation. The correct answer is A. Request and thoroughly review the applicant's Illinois firearms training certificate and curriculum details to verify it meets or exceeds the training requirements specified in Iowa Code Section 724:9, including handgun proficiency, firearm safety, and legal aspects of carrying a weapon. Explanation: Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant for a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons in Iowa to navigate the specific requirements of Iowa Code, Chapter 724, particularly concerning the reciprocity and recognition of training from other states. The applicant must demonstrate that their out-of-state training meets or exceeds Iowa's standards to be eligible for the permit, and the issuing authority must correctly assess this equivalence. Misinterpreting or misapplying these requirements can lead to either the issuance of a permit to an unqualified individual or the denial of a permit to a qualified one, both of which have significant legal and safety implications. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of the applicant's out-of-state training documentation against the specific training requirements outlined in Iowa Code Section 724. 9. This includes verifying that the training covered all the mandatory topics such as handgun proficiency, firearm safety, and the legal aspects of carrying a weapon, as mandated by Iowa law. The issuing authority must confirm that the training provider was certified or recognized in the applicant's home state and that the curriculum aligns with Iowa's standards. This approach ensures strict adherence to Iowa's legal framework for permit issuance, promoting public safety, and upholding the integrity of the permitting process. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to automatically approve the permit based solely on the applicant possessing a valid permit from another state, without independently verifying the training content. This fails to comply with Iowa Code Section 724. 9, which requires the issuing authority to assess the equivalence of the training, not just the existence of a permit. This could lead to issuing permits to individuals whose training did not meet Iowa's specific safety and legal standards. Another incorrect approach is to reject the application solely because the training was completed in a different state, without any attempt to evaluate its content or equivalency. This is contrary to the spirit of reciprocity and the provisions within Iowa Code, Chapter 724, that allow for the recognition of out-of-state training if it meets Iowa's standards. This approach unfairly penalizes applicants who have received equivalent training. A third incorrect approach is to rely on informal assurances from the applicant or their out-of-state training provider regarding the training's content without requesting or reviewing official documentation. This bypasses the necessary due diligence and could result in the approval of an application based on unsubstantiated claims, thereby compromising the safety standards established by Iowa law. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adopt a systematic and evidence-based decision-making process. This involves 1. Clearly understanding the specific statutory requirements of Iowa Code Chapter 724, particularly regarding training equivalency. 2. Requiring and meticulously reviewing all submitted documentation, including certificates of completion and detailed course outlines. 3. Comparing the applicant's training directly against the mandated curriculum in Iowa. 4. Documenting the assessment process and the rationale for approval or denial. 5. Seeking clarification or additional information from the applicant or training provider when necessary to ensure compliance. This structured approach minimizes subjective judgment and ensures decisions are grounded in legal requirements and public safety considerations. Question 5. The control framework reveals that an Iowa resident has obtained a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons in Iowa. This individual is now considering a business trip to a neighboring state and is unsure about the validity of their Iowa-issued non-resident permit in that other state for professional purposes. What is the most prudent course of action to ensure compliance with all applicable laws? Option A. Assume that the non-resident professional permit issued in Iowa is valid for carrying in any state, as professional permits are generally recognized across state lines for business-related activities. Option B. Contact the business clients in the destination state to inquire if they have any objections to the individual carrying a firearm while conducting business, as their approval would suffice for carrying. Option C. Thoroughly research Iowa Code provisions regarding non-resident permits to carry weapons, and investigate the specific firearm, carry laws and reciprocity agreements of the destination state to determine if the Iowa permit is recognized for professional carrying. Option D. Rely on the professional designation of the permit to infer that it grants broad carrying privileges in any professional setting, including in other states, without needing to verify specific state laws. The correct answer is C. Thoroughly research Iowa Code provisions regarding non-resident permits to carry weapons and investigate the specific firearm, carry laws and reciprocity agreements of the destination state to determine if the Iowa permit is recognized for professional carrying. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where an Iowa resident, who has obtained a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons in Iowa, is seeking to understand the implications of their permit status when engaging in professional activities that might involve carrying a firearm. The professional challenge lies in navigating the specific requirements and limitations of a non-resident permit, ensuring compliance with Iowa law, and understanding how this permit interacts with their professional responsibilities and potential interstate travel. Misunderstanding these nuances could lead to legal repercussions or compromise professional conduct. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding of the Iowa Code pertaining to non-resident permits to carry weapons, specifically focusing on the conditions under which such a permit is valid and any restrictions that may apply to its use in a professional capacity. This includes recognizing that a non-resident permit grants carrying privileges within Iowa, but does not automatically confer carrying rights in other states, and that professional use may have additional considerations beyond personal self-defense. Adherence to the specific terms of the permit in Iowa law is paramount. An incorrect approach would be to assume that a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons in Iowa grants the same privileges as a resident permit or a permit issued by another state, without verifying Iowa's specific regulations. This assumption overlooks the fact that reciprocity agreements between states are not universal, and that Iowa law dictates the scope of a non-resident permit. Another incorrect approach is to believe that the professional designation on the permit automatically allows for carrying in any professional context without further inquiry into specific circumstances or employer policies. This ignores the possibility of additional restrictions or requirements that may apply to carrying firearms in certain professional environments, even with a valid permit. Finally, failing to consult the Iowa Department of Public Safety or legal counsel when in doubt about the permit's validity or limitations in specific professional situations represents a significant professional failing. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes diligent research into the specific laws and regulations governing their permits. This involves consulting official state resources, understanding the precise language of the permit, and seeking clarification from relevant authorities when any ambiguity exists. A proactive approach to understanding legal obligations, rather than reactive reliance on assumptions, is crucial for maintaining compliance and professional integrity. Question 6. Cost-benefit analysis shows that obtaining a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons in Iowa requires a clear demonstration of need. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the requirements of Iowa Code Chapter 724 for such a permit? Option A. Presenting a copy of a valid handgun permit issued by the applicant's home state, assuming this automatically satisfies Iowa's requirements for a non-resident professional permit. Option B. Providing detailed documentation of the applicant's profession, specific business operations conducted in Iowa, and concrete examples of risks or threats encountered or reasonably anticipated that justify the need for carrying a firearm during business activities. Option C. Including a broad assertion of potential danger in the areas where business is conducted in Iowa without providing specific evidence or linking it to the applicant's professional activities. Option D. Submitting a general statement asserting the need for self-defense while traveling through Iowa for business purposes, without specific details about the business or risks. Correct answer is B. Providing detailed documentation of the applicant's profession, specific business operations conducted in Iowa, and concrete examples of risks or threats encountered or reasonably anticipated that justify the need for carrying a firearm during business activities. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant for a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons in Iowa to navigate the specific requirements of Iowa Code Chapter 724, particularly concerning the definition of professional and the necessity of demonstrating a legitimate business need for carrying a firearm. Misinterpreting these requirements can lead to denial of the permit, potentially impacting the applicant's ability to conduct their business safely and effectively. Careful judgment is required to ensure all documentation and justifications align precisely with Iowa's legal standards. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting the specific business activities that necessitate carrying a firearm for protection in Iowa. This includes providing detailed evidence of the applicant's profession, the nature of their business operations within Iowa, and concrete examples of risks or threats encountered or reasonably anticipated that justify the need for a permit. This approach directly addresses the core intent of Iowa Code 724:11, which allows for the issuance of a permit to a non-resident if they are legally permitted to possess a handgun in their home state and demonstrate a proper reason for carrying a handgun in Iowa. A proper reason, in the context of a professional permit, is intrinsically linked to the legitimate conduct of business and the need for personal protection during those business activities. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to submit a generic statement of self-defense without linking it to specific professional activities or business operations within Iowa. This fails to establish the proper reason required by Iowa law for a non-resident professional permit, as it does not demonstrate a specific need arising from the applicant's professional engagement in the state. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the fact that the applicant holds a valid permit in their home state. While this is a prerequisite, Iowa law requires an independent demonstration of a proper reason for carrying a weapon within Iowa's borders, irrespective of the applicant's home state permit. A further incorrect approach is to provide vague or unsubstantiated claims about potential threats without concrete examples or evidence. Iowa law expects a demonstrable need, not speculative fears, to justify the issuance of a professional permit to a non-resident. Professional reasoning. Professionals seeking a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons in Iowa should adopt a structured approach. First, thoroughly research Iowa Code, Chapter 724, paying close attention to the definitions and requirements for non-resident permits and the concept of a proper reason. Second, gather all necessary documentation, including proof of residency, home state permit, and evidence of their profession. Third, craft a detailed narrative that explicitly connects their business activities in Iowa to the need for carrying a firearm, providing specific examples of risks or threats. Finally, review all submitted materials to ensure they are comprehensive, accurate, and directly address the legal requirements of Iowa. Question 7. Which approach would be most prudent for an Iowa resident applying for a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons in Iowa, who has a prior, expunged misdemeanor conviction in their home state that is not listed as an automatic disqualifier under Iowa Code 724:11, but wishes to ensure a smooth application process? Option A. Proactively disclose the expunged misdemeanor conviction with supporting documentation and a clear explanation of its resolution, while meticulously verifying all other eligibility requirements for non-resident permits under Iowa Code Chapter 724. Option B. Omit any mention of the expunged misdemeanor conviction from the application, assuming that since it is expunged and not an automatic disqualifier, it is irrelevant to the Iowa permit application. Option C. Provide a brief, vague statement about a past legal issue without specific details or supporting documentation, hoping the issuing authority will overlook it. Option D. Rely solely on the validity of their home state's concealed carry permit, assuming automatic reciprocity and not independently verifying Iowa's specific non-resident permit requirements. The correct answer is A. Proactively disclose the expunged misdemeanor conviction with supporting documentation and a clear explanation of its resolution, while meticulously verifying all other eligibility requirements for non-resident permits under Iowa Code Chapter 724. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Iowa resident applying for a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons. The core difficulty lies in navigating the specific requirements and potential pitfalls of interstate recognition of firearm permits, particularly when the applicant has a prior, unrelated legal issue that might be misinterpreted or misapplied by the issuing authority. Ensuring compliance with Iowa's specific statutory framework for non-resident permits, while also being mindful of how out-of-state information might be perceived, requires meticulous attention to detail and a proactive approach to transparency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of Iowa Code Chapter 724, specifically sections pertaining to non-resident permits and the grounds for denial. This approach necessitates proactively disclosing any past legal encounters, even if expunged or resolved, and providing clear, concise documentation that demonstrates the applicant meets all statutory eligibility criteria under Iowa law. This includes confirming the applicant's home state permit is valid and that they have not been disqualified under Iowa Code 724. 11. By presenting a complete and transparent application, the applicant addresses potential concerns head-on, aligning with the spirit of the law which aims to ensure responsible individuals are granted permits. This proactive disclosure and adherence to specific Iowa statutory requirements is the most effective way to navigate the application process and avoid unnecessary delays or denials. Incorrect approaches analysis. Failing to disclose the prior legal matter, even if expunged, is a significant regulatory failure. Iowa Code 724. 11 outlines specific disqualifications, and while expungement may remove certain civil disabilities, the issuing authority still has discretion and may consider such matters in their determination of whether the applicant is a disqualified person. Omitting this information could be construed as an attempt to conceal relevant facts, leading to denial or revocation. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that a valid permit from another state automatically guarantees reciprocity, without verifying Iowa's specific requirements for non-resident permits. While reciprocity exists, it is not absolute and is subject to the laws of the receiving state. Relying solely on the home state permit without confirming Iowa's specific eligibility criteria for non-residents could lead to an incomplete application and denial. Finally, providing vague or incomplete information about the prior legal matter or failing to provide supporting documentation would be a regulatory failure. The issuing authority needs clear and verifiable information to make an informed decision. Ambiguity or a lack of supporting evidence leaves room for interpretation that could be unfavorable to the applicant, potentially leading to a denial based on insufficient information to establish eligibility. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to permit applications. This involves 1. Identifying the specific jurisdiction's requirements, in this case, Iowa Code Chapter 724. 2. Thoroughly reviewing all eligibility criteria and disqualifications. 3. Proactively gathering all necessary documentation, including proof of home state permit validity and any relevant legal records, even if expunged, with explanations. 4. Completing the application truthfully and comprehensively, disclosing all required information. 5. Submitting the application and maintaining open communication with the issuing authority if further clarification is needed. This methodical process ensures compliance and maximizes the likelihood of a successful outcome. Question 8. Investigation of an applicant seeking a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons in Iowa reveals they have meticulously gathered information about firearm regulations. What is the most prudent and legally compliant method for this applicant to ensure their application meets all Iowa-specific requirements? Option A. Submitting an application based solely on the firearm laws and permit requirements of their home state, assuming Iowa has similar regulations. Option B. Waiting for the Iowa Department of Public Safety to contact them if any information or documentation is missing from their submitted application. Option C. Proactively contacting the Iowa Department of Public Safety or consulting the official Iowa DPS website for the most current and accurate information regarding non-resident permit applications. Option D. Relying on informal advice and guidance obtained from online firearm enthusiast forums and discussions. The correct answer is C. Proactively contacting the Iowa Department of Public Safety or consulting the official Iowa DPS website for the most current and accurate information regarding non-resident permit applications. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a non-resident applicant to navigate Iowa's specific legal requirements for obtaining a permit to carry weapons, which differ from their home state's regulations. The applicant must demonstrate a thorough understanding of Iowa Code Chapter 724 and the administrative rules governing non-resident permits, ensuring all documentation is accurate and complete to avoid delays or denial. The core challenge lies in ensuring compliance with a jurisdiction's laws that are not their own, necessitating meticulous attention to detail and a proactive approach to information gathering. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the applicant proactively contacting the Iowa Department of Public Safety, DPS, or consulting the official Iowa DPS website for the most current and accurate information regarding non-resident permit applications. This approach is correct because Iowa Code 724:11 specifically outlines the requirements for permits issued to residents and non-residents, and the DPS is the designated authority responsible for administering these permits. Relying on official sources ensures the applicant is adhering to the precise statutory requirements, including the necessary application forms, background check procedures, and any reciprocity agreements or specific training mandates for non-residents, thereby maximizing the likelihood of a successful application and avoiding potential legal pitfalls. Incorrect approach is analysis. Submitting an application based solely on the laws of their home state is professionally unacceptable because Iowa Code 724:11 mandates that non-residents must meet Iowa's specific criteria for obtaining a permit. Each state has its own distinct legal framework for firearm permits, and assuming reciprocity or identical requirements is a direct violation of the governing statute. Relying on informal advice from online forums or individuals without verifying with the Iowa DPS is professionally unacceptable. While such sources may offer anecdotal information, they do not constitute official guidance and can be outdated or inaccurate, leading to incomplete or incorrect applications that will likely be denied under Iowa Code 724:11. Waiting for the Iowa DPS to request missing information after submission is professionally unacceptable. The onus is on the applicant to provide all required documentation as stipulated by Iowa Code 724:11. Proactive verification and submission of complete information demonstrate due diligence and respect for the application process. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a proactive and diligent approach when dealing with regulatory requirements in unfamiliar jurisdictions. This involves identifying the relevant governing body, in this case, the Iowa DPS, seeking out official documentation and guidance, and meticulously adhering to all specified procedures and requirements. A structured approach, starting with official sources and cross-referencing information, is crucial for ensuring compliance and achieving successful outcomes. Question 9. Assessment of a non-resident permit to carry weapons holder in Iowa who is at a public park and observes a group of individuals engaged in loud, aggressive verbal altercations that appear to be escalating. The permit holder feels uneasy and perceives a potential for violence, but there is no immediate physical contact or overt display of weapons. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for the permit holder to take under Iowa law? Option A. Immediately draw their firearm to signal their presence and deter any potential escalation of the altercation. Option B. Call law enforcement and then immediately leave the park entirely, regardless of the proximity of the individuals. Option C. Approach the individuals to verbally intervene and attempt to de-escalate the situation themselves. Option D. Discreetly move away from the area to a safe distance and observe from afar, prepared to contact law enforcement if the situation deteriorates into physical violence or a clear threat emerges. The correct answer is D. Discreetly move away from the area to a safe distance and observe from afar, prepared to contact law enforcement if the situation deteriorates into physical violence or a clear threat emerges. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents an ethical dilemma for a non-resident permit holder in Iowa who encounters a situation that could be interpreted as a threat, but where the immediate danger is ambiguous. The challenge lies in balancing the right to self-defense with the responsibility to act lawfully and avoid escalating a situation unnecessarily, especially when carrying a firearm under a permit that is subject to specific Iowa laws and reciprocity agreements. The professional challenge is to apply judgment in a high-stress situation, adhering strictly to the legal framework governing permit to carry weapons in Iowa, which includes understanding the nuances of justifiable use of force. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves de-escalation and seeking to disengage from the situation without resorting to the use of the firearm. This aligns with the principle of using deadly force only as a last resort when there is an imminent threat of death or serious injury, as generally understood under Iowa law concerning justifiable homicide and self-defense. Permit holder is not authorized to use their weapon to intimidate or to intervene in every perceived disturbance. The focus should be on personal safety and avoiding actions that could be construed as aggressive or unnecessary. This approach prioritizes lawful conduct and minimizes the risk of legal repercussions or unintended harm. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately draw the firearm to deter the individuals. This is problematic because drawing a weapon without an immediate, overt threat of death or serious bodily injury can be considered an aggressive act and may not be legally justifiable under Iowa self-defense statutes. It risks escalating the situation and could lead to legal consequences if the individuals perceive the drawing of the weapon as an assault or threat. Another incorrect approach is to confront the individuals verbally and physically to ascertain their intentions. This is professionally unsound as it unnecessarily places the permit holder in a potentially dangerous situation. Engaging physically or aggressively without a clear and present danger violates the principle of avoiding unnecessary risks and could lead to a situation where the use of force, even if later deemed justifiable, could have been avoided through disengagement. A third incorrect approach is to leave the scene immediately without any attempt to assess the situation or ensure personal safety. While disengagement is often a good strategy, abandoning the scene without any consideration for personal safety or the potential for the situation to escalate further if the individuals are armed, become aggressive toward the permit holder could be a failure to act reasonably in self-defense. The goal is to disengage safely and lawfully, not to flee in a manner that could expose oneself to greater risk. Professional reasoning. Professionals in possession of a permit to carry weapons in Iowa must cultivate a mindset of responsible firearm ownership and use. This involves understanding that the permit grants the right to carry, not a license to engage in vigilantism or to use force preemptively. The decision-making process should prioritize de-escalation, situational awareness, and lawful disengagement. When faced with a potentially threatening situation, professionals should ask, is there an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury to myself or others? If the answer is no, the primary course of action should be to create distance and avoid confrontation. If the answer is yes, then the use of force, up to and including deadly force, may be justifiable, but only to the extent necessary to repel the threat. This requires a calm, rational assessment of the immediate circumstances, not an emotional or impulsive reaction. Question 10. Stakeholder feedback indicates that non-resident permit holders in Iowa who change their state of residency prior to their permit's expiration date may face confusion regarding the correct renewal fee. If a non-resident permit holder's permit was issued on January 15, 2023, with an expiration date of January 15, 2025, and they establish residency in another state on July 15, 2024, requiring an adjustment to their permit's renewal process, and the statutory annual renewal fee for a non-resident permit is $50. What is the correct prorated renewal fee they should be prepared to pay to maintain their permit's validity until the original expiration date? Option A, $12.50. Option B, $37.50. Option C, $25.00. Option D, $50.00. The correct answer is C, $25.00. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a non-resident permit holder in Iowa by introducing a complex financial calculation tied to the renewal process. The core difficulty lies in accurately determining the prorated renewal fee when the permit's expiration date is altered due to a change in residency, requiring a precise understanding of Iowa's fee structure and renewal regulations. Failure to correctly calculate the fee can lead to either overpayment or underpayment, both of which have regulatory and financial implications. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves calculating the prorated renewal fee based on the remaining validity period of the permit from the date of the residency change until the original expiration date, using the statutory annual fee. This approach is correct because Iowa Code Section 724.11.2 outlines the renewal process for non-resident permits and implies a prorated fee structure when circumstances necessitate an early renewal or adjustment. The annual fee for a non-resident permit is established, and the prorated amount ensures fairness and compliance with the spirit of the law, which is to collect the appropriate fee for the period of validity. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that calculates the full annual renewal fee regardless of the remaining validity period is incorrect because it fails to account for the prorated nature implied by a change in circumstances affecting the permit's expiration. This would result in an overpayment by the permit holder, which is not the intended outcome of the fee structure. An approach that attempts to prorate the fee based on a fixed monthly rate without reference to the annual statutory fee is incorrect. This introduces an arbitrary calculation not supported by Iowa's statutory framework for permit fees, potentially leading to an inaccurate and non-compliant fee. An approach that suggests no fee is due because the permit is not being renewed in the standard cycle is incorrect. Iowa Code Section 724.11.2 addresses renewal procedures, and a change in residency that alters the expiration date still necessitates a compliant renewal process, which includes the appropriate fee. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first identifying the relevant statutory provisions governing permit renewals and fee structures in Iowa. They should then break down the calculation into its constituent parts: the annual fee, the original expiration date, and the new effective date for renewal. Using these components, they can apply a prorated calculation, ensuring that the fee accurately reflects the remaining period of permit validity. If ambiguity exists, consulting the Iowa Department of Public Safety or legal counsel is a prudent step. Question 11. Risk assessment procedures indicate that an individual residing in Illinois is seeking a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons in Iowa. The applicant's profession involves transporting valuable goods across state lines and occasionally into Iowa. They state their primary reason for carrying a firearm is to deter potential theft and ensure their personal safety during these transports within Iowa. What is the most appropriate approach for the applicant to take when submitting their application to the Iowa Department of Public Safety? Option A. Provide detailed documentation outlining their professional responsibilities, the specific nature of the goods transported, the routes taken within Iowa, and a clear explanation of how carrying a firearm directly addresses documented risks associated with their professional duties in the state. Option B. Emphasize their personal safety concerns and the general risks of transporting valuables, without detailing the specific professional context within Iowa. Option C. Simply state that they carry a weapon for professional protection during their business activities in Iowa. Option D. Submit a letter from their employer confirming their employment, but omit specific details about the nature of their work or the necessity of carrying a firearm. The correct answer is A. Provide detailed documentation outlining their professional responsibilities, the specific nature of the goods transported, the routes taken within Iowa, and a clear explanation of how carrying a firearm directly addresses documented risks associated with their professional duties in the state. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Iowa resident applying for a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons. The challenge lies in navigating the potential for misinterpretation of the applicant's intentions and ensuring compliance with Iowa's specific legal framework for such permits, particularly concerning the distinction between personal protection and professional duties. The applicant's stated purpose for carrying a weapon, even if related to their profession, must align with the statutory requirements for a non-resident permit, which often have stricter criteria than resident permits. Careful judgment is required to avoid misrepresenting the situation or failing to meet the legal threshold for permit issuance. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves accurately and comprehensively documenting the applicant's professional responsibilities that necessitate carrying a weapon for their specific role within Iowa. This includes providing detailed information about the nature of their work, the specific risks encountered, and how carrying a weapon directly mitigates those risks in a professional capacity, as defined by Iowa Code. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the statutory requirements for a non-resident professional permit, demonstrating a legitimate and legally recognized need for carrying a firearm in the course of professional duties within the state. It avoids ambiguity and provides the issuing authority with the necessary information to make an informed decision based on Iowa law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply state that the applicant carries a weapon for professional protection without further elaboration. This is insufficient because it lacks the specificity required by Iowa law for a non-resident professional permit. It fails to demonstrate a direct nexus between the professional duties and the need for a firearm, leaving the determination to the discretion of the issuing authority without adequate justification. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the applicant's personal safety concerns unrelated to their specific professional duties in Iowa. While personal safety is a valid concern, A non-resident professional permit is granted based on the exigencies of professional activity within the state, not general personal security. This approach misaligns with the statutory purpose of the permit. A third incorrect approach is to provide vague or incomplete documentation regarding the applicant's employer and the nature of their business. This lack of transparency and detail hinders the issuing authority's ability to verify the legitimacy of the professional need and assess compliance with Iowa's regulations for non-resident permits. It creates an impression of an attempt to circumvent proper procedures. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a systematic approach. First, thoroughly understand the specific requirements of Iowa Code pertaining to non-resident professional permits to carry weapons. Second, engage in open and honest communication with the applicant to gather all relevant details about their profession and the specific reasons for needing to carry a weapon in Iowa. Third, meticulously document all information, ensuring it directly addresses the statutory criteria and clearly articulates the professional necessity. Finally, submit the application with complete and accurate information, prepared to provide further clarification if requested by the issuing authority. Question 12. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need to clarify the responsibilities of individuals holding an Iowa non-resident professional permit to carry weapons. An individual, a resident of Nebraska, who has obtained this permit, is visiting Iowa for a business conference. While attending a private reception at a hotel, they are approached by a stranger who makes aggressive, threatening remarks and appears to be intoxicated. The individual is legally carrying their firearm under their non-resident permit. What is the most appropriate course of action for the permit holder in this situation, considering Iowa law? Option A. Leave the firearm secured in their hotel room for the duration of their stay in Iowa to avoid any potential legal complications. Option B. Immediately draw their firearm to de-escalate the situation and deter further aggression from the stranger. Option C. Assess the immediate threat and, if necessary, take appropriate action to defend themselves in accordance with Iowa Code Chapter 724, while remaining aware of any specific location restrictions associated with their permit. Option D. Rely on the firearm laws of their home state of Nebraska to determine the appropriate response to the aggressive individual. The correct answer is C. Assess the immediate threat and, if necessary, take appropriate action to defend themselves in accordance with Iowa Code Chapter 724, while remaining aware of any specific location restrictions associated with their permit. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between an individual's right to self-defense and the legal obligations associated with carrying a concealed weapon, particularly when that right is extended through a non-resident permit. The complexity arises from the need to balance personal safety concerns with strict adherence to Iowa's legal framework governing the carrying of firearms by those not residing in the state. Careful judgment is required to navigate the nuances of permit validity, reciprocity, and the specific circumstances under which carrying a weapon is permissible and responsible. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to the terms and conditions of the Iowa non-resident professional permit to carry weapons. This means recognizing that the permit is granted under specific Iowa statutes and that the permit holder is bound by Iowa law when carrying a weapon within the state. The permit holder must be aware of any limitations or restrictions associated with their permit, such as prohibitions on carrying in certain locations or under specific conditions, and must always act in a manner that is consistent with Iowa Code Chapter 724. This approach is correct because it prioritizes legal compliance and responsible firearm ownership as mandated by the state that issued the permit, ensuring that the individual is acting within the bounds of the law and upholding the trust placed in them by the permitting authority. An incorrect approach would be to assume that the non-resident permit grants the same rights and carries the same responsibilities as a resident permit without verifying the specific provisions of Iowa law. This could lead to violations if there are differences in regulations or if the permit holder misunderstands the scope of their authorization. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the laws of their home state when carrying in Iowa, as reciprocity agreements do not negate the requirement to follow the laws of the state where the weapon is being carried. This demonstrates a failure to understand that jurisdiction dictates the applicable laws. Finally, an approach that involves carrying a weapon in a manner that is reckless or demonstrates a disregard for public safety, even if technically within the letter of the law, would be ethically unsound and could lead to legal repercussions, as the permit is granted with the expectation of responsible and lawful conduct. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the governing jurisdiction and its specific laws. This involves actively seeking out and understanding the relevant statutes and regulations, such as Iowa Code Chapter 724, pertaining to carrying weapons. Before exercising the privilege granted by a non-resident permit, a professional should confirm the permit's validity, any associated restrictions, and the legal requirements for carrying in Iowa. This proactive verification process, coupled with a commitment to responsible and lawful conduct, forms the basis for sound professional judgment in such situations. Question 13. The risk matrix shows that your client, a firearms instructor applying for a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons in Iowa, has recently been involved in a significant business acquisition. This acquisition involves a company that has faced past regulatory scrutiny in another state, though not directly related to firearms. Your client believes this acquisition has no direct impact on their personal eligibility for the Iowa permit, but is concerned about potential indirect implications. What is the most ethically and legally sound approach for your client to take regarding this situation in Iowa? Option A. Assume the acquisition is irrelevant to the Iowa non-resident professional permit to carry weapons, as it does not directly involve firearms or Iowa-based operations, and therefore no disclosure is necessary. Option B. Wait to disclose the acquisition until the Iowa Department of Public Safety specifically requests information about any recent business dealings during the permit renewal process. Option C. Consult with their business attorney to understand the legal implications of the acquisition for their business interests, and only disclose to the Iowa Department of Public Safety if the attorney advises it is a legal requirement. Option D. Immediately report the business acquisition to the Iowa Department of Public Safety, providing details of the transaction and any relevant information about the acquired company, and inquire if it impacts their permit eligibility. Correct answer is D. Immediately report the business acquisition to the Iowa Department of Public Safety, providing details of the transaction and any relevant information about the acquired company, and inquire if it impacts their permit eligibility. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a potential conflict of interest arising from a recent business acquisition that could impact the applicant's eligibility for a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons in Iowa. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to navigate complex ethical considerations and understand the specific reporting requirements under Iowa law, balancing business interests with legal obligations. A failure to disclose could have severe legal and professional repercussions. The best approach involves immediate and transparent communication with the Iowa Department of Public Safety. This proactive disclosure demonstrates a commitment to upholding the integrity of the permitting process and adhering to Iowa Code Chapter 724. By reporting the acquisition and any potential conflicts, the applicant ensures they are acting in good faith and allows the department to assess the situation according to established legal standards. This aligns with the ethical duty of candor and the legal requirement to report material changes that might affect permit eligibility. Failing to disclose the acquisition until specifically asked is professionally unacceptable. This approach suggests an intent to conceal information, which directly violates the principle of honesty and could be interpreted as an attempt to circumvent the permit requirements. It creates an appearance of impropriety and undermines the trust placed in permit holders. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to assume the acquisition has no bearing on the permit. This demonstrates a lack of diligence in understanding the potential implications of significant business changes on one's legal standing and eligibility for permits. It is a failure to exercise reasonable professional judgment and a disregard for the spirit of the law, which aims to ensure that permit holders remain qualified and law-abiding. Finally, seeking advice from a business attorney without also consulting the Iowa Department of Public Safety is insufficient. While legal counsel is important, the primary obligation is to the regulatory body that issues the permit. A business attorney may not be fully versed in the specific nuances of Iowa's firearms permit regulations, and their advice, while legally sound in a business context, might not address the direct reporting requirements to the Department of Public Safety. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency and adherence to regulatory requirements. This involves understanding the scope of one's obligations under relevant laws, proactively identifying potential conflicts or changes that might affect eligibility, and communicating such information promptly and directly to the relevant authorities. When in doubt, erring on the side of overdisclosure and seeking clarification from the issuing agency is always the most prudent course of action. Question 14. Stakeholder feedback indicates that some Iowa non-resident professional permit to carry weapons holders have expressed discomfort or moral reservations about carrying their firearm in certain public venues, even when legally permitted to do so. Considering the legal framework governing these permits in Iowa, which of the following represents the most professionally responsible course of action for a permit holder facing such a dilemma? Option A. Carry the firearm but adopt a posture or demeanor that signals a personal objection or reluctance, potentially causing unease to others. Option B. Adhere to the legal provisions of the Iowa non-resident professional permit to carry weapons, carrying the firearm as permitted by law, while understanding that personal moral objections do not supersede legal requirements when acting under the authority of the permit. Option C. Interpret the legal permissions of the permit based on personal feelings of what constitutes a reasonable or appropriate circumstance for carrying. Option D. Refrain from carrying the firearm in any situation where personal moral objections arise, regardless of whether the location is legally permissible for carrying under the permit. The correct answer is B. Adhere to the legal provisions of the Iowa non-resident professional permit to carry weapons, carrying the firearm as permitted by law, while understanding that personal moral objections do not supersede legal requirements when acting under the authority of the permit. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a licensee's personal beliefs and the legal requirements of carrying a concealed weapon under an Iowa non-resident professional permit to carry weapons. The licensee must navigate their moral compass while adhering strictly to Iowa law, which prioritizes public safety and the legal framework governing permit holders. The core of the challenge lies in balancing personal convictions with professional obligations and legal mandates. The best professional approach involves prioritizing legal compliance and public safety above personal beliefs when acting under the authority of a permit. This means understanding that the permit grants a specific legal privilege, and exercising that privilege requires adherence to all associated regulations, regardless of personal feelings about specific situations. The Iowa Code, specifically regarding the carrying of weapons, mandates that permit holders must act responsibly and in accordance with the law. This approach is correct because it upholds the integrity of the permit system, ensures public safety by adhering to established legal standards, and demonstrates professional responsibility by placing legal obligations above personal moral judgments in a context where legal authority is being exercised. An incorrect approach would be to refuse to carry the weapon based on a personal moral objection to the specific location or situation, even if legally permitted to carry there. This fails to acknowledge that the permit is a legal authorization, not a discretionary tool subject to individual moral interpretation in the moment of potential need. Such a refusal could be seen as a dereliction of the responsibility that comes with the permit, potentially jeopardizing the safety of oneself or others if a situation arises where the weapon might be necessary and legally permissible to use. Another incorrect approach would be to carry the weapon, but to do so in a manner that is overtly provocative or intended to intimidate, even if not explicitly violating a specific statute. While the permit allows for carrying, it does not grant license for aggressive or threatening behavior. This would be ethically unsound and could lead to misunderstandings, escalations, and potential legal repercussions, undermining the responsible exercise of the permit. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to rely on personal interpretations of reasonable circumstances for carrying, deviating from the explicit permissions and restrictions outlined in Iowa law. The permit is issued based on a legal standard, and its use must align with that standard, not a subjective, ad hoc assessment of appropriateness. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the Iowa Code pertaining to the non-resident professional permit to carry weapons. This includes identifying the specific rights and responsibilities conferred by the permit. The next step is to assess the situation against these legal requirements, not personal feelings. If the situation falls within the legal parameters for carrying, the professional obligation is to comply with the law. If the situation presents a conflict with personal ethics, The professional should consider whether the permit is still appropriate for them to hold, or if they should refrain from carrying in that specific instance, rather than making an on-the-spot, legally questionable judgment call. Seeking clarification from legal counsel or the issuing authority is also a prudent step when faced with ambiguity. Question 15. Process analysis reveals that an Iowa resident holding a valid Iowa non-resident professional permit to carry weapons is planning a business trip to Illinois. Given the significant differences in firearm regulations between the two states, what is the most prudent and legally compliant course of action regarding carrying a firearm during this trip? Option A. Carry the firearm as permitted by Iowa law. The permit is an Iowa-issued document and therefore supersedes the laws of other states for the permit holder. Option B. Rely on informal advice from fellow travelers or acquaintances who have previously carried firearms into Illinois to determine the legality of carrying a firearm. Option C. Thoroughly research Illinois-specific firearm laws and any reciprocity agreements with Iowa to ensure full compliance before carrying a firearm into the state. Option D. Assume that the Iowa non-resident professional permit to carry weapons is valid for carrying a firearm in Illinois, as it is a recognized professional permit. The correct answer is C. Thoroughly research Illinois-specific firearm laws and any reciprocity agreements with Iowa to ensure full compliance before carrying a firearm into the state. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Iowa resident who has obtained a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons. Core of the challenge lies in navigating the potential conflict between the permit's validity in Iowa and the differing legal requirements and social norms of a neighboring state, specifically Illinois, which has significantly stricter firearm regulations. The professional must exercise careful judgment to avoid inadvertently violating laws in either jurisdiction, which could lead to severe legal consequences, including arrest, fines, and revocation of their Iowa permit. The ethical dimension arises from the responsibility to act lawfully and responsibly, respecting the laws of all jurisdictions in which one operates, even when those laws differ. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to proactively research and understand the specific firearm laws of any state one intends to carry a weapon into, even if possessing a valid permit from another state. This involves consulting official government websites, legal resources, or legal counsel specializing in firearm law for the destination state. For Illinois, this would mean understanding its specific requirements for carrying firearms, including any reciprocity agreements with Iowa, prohibited locations, and training mandates. Adhering to these laws is paramount, as an Iowa non-resident professional permit does not automatically grant the right to carry a firearm in any state other than Iowa, unless specific reciprocity agreements are in place and fully understood. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and responsible firearm ownership. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that a valid Iowa non-resident professional permit to carry weapons automatically allows for carrying a firearm in any other state, including Illinois. This assumption is legally flawed because firearm laws are state-specific, and permits are generally only valid within the issuing state or in states with formal reciprocity agreements that have been thoroughly investigated and understood. Relying on such an assumption could lead to a violation of Illinois law. Another incorrect approach is to only consider Iowa's laws and disregard the laws of Illinois because the permit is an Iowa permit. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to recognize that carrying a firearm across state lines subjects an individual to the laws of the destination state. The permit's validity is tied to Iowa's legal framework, not a universal right to carry. A third incorrect approach is to rely on anecdotal information or the advice of individuals who may not be fully informed about the specific legal nuances of carrying firearms in Illinois. While well-intentioned, such advice can be inaccurate and lead to serious legal trouble. Professional decision-making requires consulting authoritative sources rather than hearsay. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing this situation should adopt a decision-making framework that emphasizes proactive legal research and adherence to the strictest applicable laws. This involves 1. Identifying the jurisdictions involved, Iowa and Illinois. 2. Determining the legal requirements for carrying firearms in each jurisdiction. 3. Specifically investigating reciprocity agreements between Iowa and Illinois regarding firearm permits. 4. Consulting official government resources or legal professionals for accurate and up-to-date information. 5. prioritizing compliance with the laws of the destination state, even if they are more restrictive than the laws of the issuing state. 6. Avoiding assumptions and seeking definitive legal guidance before acting. Question 16. The efficiency study reveals that a close personal friend and former business partner of a senior licensing officer in Iowa has applied for a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons. The licensing officer, while not directly responsible for the final approval, is tasked with conducting an initial review of the application and providing a recommendation. What is the most ethically sound and regulatorily compliant course of action for the licensing officer? Option A. Discreetly advocate for the applicant to colleagues involved in the final decision, highlighting the applicant's positive attributes without explicitly mentioning the personal connection. Option B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the licensing authority and recuse themselves from any involvement in the review or recommendation process for this specific application. Option C. Proceed with the review, confident in their ability to remain objective, and provide a recommendation based solely on the merits of the application, without disclosing the personal relationship. Option D. Assign the review to a junior staff member without informing them of the personal relationship, assuming they will conduct an unbiased assessment. The correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the licensing authority and recuse themselves from any involvement in the review or recommendation process for this specific application. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential conflict of interest that requires careful ethical consideration and strict adherence to Iowa's non-resident professional permit to carry weapons regulations. The scenario is professionally challenging because it pits a desire for professional advancement and recognition against the fundamental duty to uphold the integrity of the permitting process and avoid even the appearance of impropriety. A professional in this situation must navigate the delicate balance between personal ambition and public trust. The best professional approach involves prioritizing transparency and recusal. This means immediately disclosing the potential conflict to the relevant licensing authority in Iowa and recusing oneself from any decision-making processes that could directly or indirectly benefit the applicant or the firm. This approach is correct because Iowa law, like most regulatory frameworks governing permits and licenses, emphasizes impartiality and the avoidance of conflicts of interest to maintain public confidence in the fairness and integrity of the system. Ethically, it aligns with principles of professional conduct that demand honesty, integrity, and the duty to act in the best interest of the public, not for personal gain or to favor associates. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the application review without disclosure, believing that personal objectivity can overcome the inherent bias. This fails to meet regulatory requirements by not proactively addressing a known conflict and creates an unacceptable appearance of impropriety, even if no actual undue influence occurs. It erodes public trust and violates ethical obligations to be impartial. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to subtly influence the outcome in favor of the applicant, perhaps by downplaying concerns or highlighting positive aspects without full disclosure. This is a direct violation of regulatory principles requiring objective assessment and constitutes unethical behavior, potentially leading to disciplinary action and undermining the credibility of the permitting process. A further incorrect approach would be to delegate the review to a subordinate without informing them of the potential conflict or the need for heightened scrutiny. This is a dereliction of professional responsibility, as it fails to ensure that the review is conducted with the necessary impartiality and awareness of the ethical considerations. It also places the subordinate in a compromised position. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts of interest. Once identified, the next step is to consult relevant regulations and ethical codes. If a conflict exists, the professional should then consider options for mitigation, which often include disclosure and recusal. Transparency and a commitment to impartiality should guide all decisions, ensuring that the integrity of the process and public trust are paramount. Question 17. What factors determine the legality and ethical considerations for an Iowa resident holding a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons when planning to carry their firearm into a neighboring state with potentially different firearm regulations? Option A. Verifying the existence and scope of reciprocity agreements between Iowa and the destination state, and thoroughly researching the specific firearm laws of the destination state, including any restrictions on carrying in certain locations. Option B. Relying on anecdotal information from other permit holders about the destination state's firearm laws. Option C. Proceeding to carry the firearm in the destination state without any specific research, based on the belief that the permit provides sufficient authority. Option D. Assuming that the Iowa non-resident professional permit to carry weapons is recognized in all other states due to its professional designation. The correct answer is A. Verifying the existence and scope of reciprocity agreements between Iowa and the destination state, and thoroughly researching the specific firearm laws of the destination state, including any restrictions on carrying in certain locations. Explanation. This scenario presents an ethical dilemma for an Iowa resident who has obtained a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons and is considering carrying their firearm in a state with significantly different firearm regulations. The professional challenge lies in navigating the complex and often conflicting legal landscapes of different jurisdictions, where a lawful act in one state can be a serious offense in another. This requires a high degree of diligence, ethical responsibility, and a commitment to upholding the law, even when it is inconvenient. Careful judgment is required to avoid unintentional violations that could have severe legal and professional consequences. The best approach involves proactively researching and understanding the specific firearm laws of any state the individual intends to carry a weapon into. This includes verifying reciprocity agreements between Iowa and the destination state, as well as understanding any local ordinances or restrictions that may apply. This proactive research ensures compliance with all applicable laws, thereby upholding the ethical duty to act lawfully and responsibly. It demonstrates a commitment to public safety and respect for the legal frameworks of other jurisdictions. An incorrect approach would be to assume that a permit valid in Iowa automatically grants the same rights and protections in all other states. This assumption disregards the fundamental principle that firearm laws are state-specific and that reciprocity is not universal. Relying on such an assumption could lead to an unintentional violation of the destination state's laws, resulting in arrest, prosecution, and the potential revocation of the Iowa permit. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal advice from others or outdated information. Laws change, and the nuances of firearm regulations can be easily misinterpreted. This can lead to a false sense of security and a failure to comply with current legal requirements. Finally, an incorrect approach is to ignore the possibility of differing laws and simply carry the firearm as if the Iowa permit were universally recognized. This demonstrates a reckless disregard for the legal responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed weapon and a lack of respect for the laws of other states. Professionals in this situation should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and public safety. This involves 1. Identifying the destination state, 2. Thoroughly researching that state's specific firearm laws, including concealed carry regulations, reciprocity with Iowa, and any prohibited locations, 3. Consulting official government resources, e.g., State Attorney General's Office, state police websites, for the most accurate and up-to-date information, 4. If uncertainty remains, seeking legal counsel specializing in firearm law in the destination state. 5. Making a decision based on verified legal information, prioritizing compliance above all else. Question 18. Compliance review shows that an individual who holds a valid Iowa non-resident professional permit to carry weapons has recently moved and established residency in Nebraska. The permit is still within its expiration date. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for this individual regarding their Iowa permit? Option A. Assume the Iowa non-resident permit remains valid as long as it is not expired, regardless of their new state of residence. Option B. Continue to carry a weapon under the authority of the Iowa non-resident permit as it has not yet expired and plan to address it upon renewal. Option C. Attempt to renew the Iowa non-resident permit online without disclosing the change in residency, assuming the system will not detect the move. Option D. Immediately notify the Iowa Department of Public Safety of their change in residency and surrender the Iowa permit, understanding it will likely be invalidated. The correct answer is D. Immediately notify the Iowa Department of Public Safety of their change in residency and surrender the Iowa permit, understanding it will likely be invalidated. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a potential conflict between an individual's personal circumstances and the strict requirements for maintaining a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons in Iowa. The challenge lies in accurately interpreting and applying Iowa Code, Chapter 724, specifically regarding the conditions under which a permit can be suspended or revoked, and the applicant's responsibility to report changes in their status. A failure to correctly assess the situation could lead to serious legal and professional repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves immediately and accurately reporting the change in residency status to the Iowa Department of Public Safety. Iowa Code Section 724-17. 1. Mandates that permit holder must notify the issuing authority of any change of address within 30 days. Furthermore, a non-resident permit is contingent upon maintaining residency in the issuing state. By proactively reporting the move, the individual demonstrates compliance with Iowa law and allows the department to properly process the permit according to the new residency status, which will likely result in the permit being invalidated and requiring a new application under the laws of their new state of residence. This approach prioritizes transparency and adherence to legal obligations. Incorrect approaches analysis. Failing to report the change in residency, and continuing to carry a weapon under the Iowa permit, even if the permit is still technically valid on its face, is a violation of Iowa Code Section 724-17-1. This approach disregards the legal requirement to inform the issuing authority of address changes and misrepresents the individual's eligibility to carry under the non-resident permit, which is tied to their out-of-state residency. Attempting to renew the Iowa permit without disclosing the change in residency, hoping it will go unnoticed, is a form of deception. This is ethically unsound and violates the principle of honesty in dealings with regulatory bodies. It also contravenes the spirit and letter of Iowa Code Chapter 724, which presumes the permit holder's continued eligibility based on their non-resident status. Assuming the Iowa permit remains valid indefinitely as long as it has not expired, regardless of a change in residency, demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of permit conditions. Non-resident permits are specifically for individuals residing outside of Iowa. A change in residency fundamentally alters the basis upon which the permit was issued, making this assumption legally incorrect and potentially leading to carrying a weapon without proper authorization in their new state of residence. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a proactive and transparent approach. The decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the relevant legal and regulatory requirements, Iowa Code Chapter 724. 2. Understanding the specific conditions attached to the permit non-resident status. 3. Recognizing any reporting obligations for changes in personal circumstances. 4. Prioritizing honest and timely communication with the issuing authority. 5. Seeking clarification from the relevant agency if there is any ambiguity. This systematic approach ensures compliance and upholds professional integrity. Question 19. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need to refine the process for evaluating non-resident applicants for a professional permit to carry weapons in Iowa. An applicant, a licensed private investigator operating primarily in Illinois, but occasionally conducting investigations that require their presence in Iowa, has applied for a permit. They state that their professional duties sometimes involve situations where they need to protect themselves and their clients during sensitive investigations, and they wish to carry their firearm while in Iowa for these purposes. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Iowa issuing officer? Option A. Focus the evaluation primarily on the applicant's personal demeanor during the application process, assessing their perceived trustworthiness and calmness, as this is a key indicator of responsible firearm ownership. Option B. Engage in a direct, professional conversation with the applicant to understand the specific nature of their investigative activities in Iowa that necessitate carrying a firearm, and review any supporting documentation that corroborates this need, to ensure compliance with Iowa Code Chapter 724 regarding permits to carry weapons and public safety. Option C. Issue the permit immediately, as the applicant has stated a professional need and is a licensed private investigator, implying a level of responsibility and training. Option D. Deny the permit based on the applicant being a non-resident and the general concern that allowing individuals from other states to carry weapons in Iowa could compromise public safety. The correct answer is B. Engage in a direct, professional conversation with the applicant to understand the specific nature of their investigative activities in Iowa that necessitate carrying a firearm, and review any supporting documentation that corroborates this need, to ensure compliance with Iowa Code Chapter 724 regarding permits to carry weapons and public safety. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the applicant's stated intent with the legal requirements and ethical considerations surrounding the issuance of a non-resident professional permit to carry weapons in Iowa. The challenge lies in discerning whether the applicant's stated purpose for carrying a weapon, while seemingly legitimate in a professional context, aligns with the spirit and letter of Iowa law, particularly concerning the potential for misuse or the perception of intent beyond professional necessity. Careful judgment is required to avoid both the arbitrary denial of a permit and the issuance of a permit to an individual who may not meet the statutory criteria or poses an undue risk. The best professional approach involves a thorough review of the applicant's documentation and a direct, professional inquiry into the specific nature of their professional duties that necessitate carrying a weapon. This approach prioritizes adherence to Iowa Code Chapter 724, which governs permits to carry weapons. Specifically, it requires the issuing officer to determine if the applicant is a disqualified person, and if issuing the permit is not incompatible with the public safety. By seeking clarification on the precise professional activities that require carrying a weapon, the officer can assess whether the applicant's stated need is genuine and directly related to their professional responsibilities, thereby ensuring the permit is issued only to those who meet the statutory requirements and do not pose a risk to public safety. This aligns with the ethical duty to uphold the law and protect the public. An incorrect approach would be to grant the permit solely based on the applicant's assertion of professional need, without further investigation. This fails to meet the statutory obligation to assess compatibility with public safety, and could lead to the issuance of a permit to someone whose professional activities do not genuinely require it, or who may have intentions that are not solely professional. Another incorrect approach is to deny the permit outright based on a generalized concern about individuals carrying weapons, without conducting a specific assessment of this applicant's circumstances against Iowa law. This would be an arbitrary denial and could violate the applicant's rights if they otherwise meet the legal criteria. Finally, focusing solely on the applicant's perceived demeanor rather than their stated professional duties and Iowa's legal requirements is an insufficient basis for a decision. Professional judgment must be grounded in legal statutes and objective assessments of risk and necessity. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the relevant statutes and regulations. Iowa Code, Chapter 724. This should be followed by a systematic review of all submitted documentation. Where ambiguities or potential concerns arise, direct, professional, and non-accusatory inquiry is essential to gather necessary information. The decision should then be made based on a comprehensive assessment of the applicant's qualifications against the legal criteria, with a primary focus on public safety and adherence to the law. Question 20. Market research demonstrates that individuals holding an Iowa non-resident professional permit to carry weapons may encounter situations where they feel their personal safety is at risk, even when not actively engaged in their professional duties. If a permit holder, whose permit is specifically tied to their role as a licensed private investigator conducting surveillance, is off-duty and in a public park, and observes what they perceive as suspicious activity that makes them feel uneasy, how should they ethically and legally proceed regarding their firearm? Option A. Carry the firearm concealed in the park, relying on a personal calculation of the perceived threat level based on the suspicious activity observed. Option B. Assume the permit provides general self-defense rights and carry the firearm openly in the park to deter potential threats. Option C. Conceal the firearm in the park, believing that the permit, even if not actively used for professional duties, offers a baseline legal right to carry for personal protection in any public space within Iowa. Option D. Strictly adhere to the terms of the Iowa non-resident professional permit to carry weapons, recognizing it is valid only for professional duties, and refrain from carrying the firearm in the park if not engaged in licensed investigative activity. The correct answer is D. Strictly adhere to the terms of the Iowa non-resident professional permit to carry weapons, recognizing it is valid only for professional duties, and refrain from carrying the firearm in the park if not engaged in licensed investigative activity. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a non-resident permit holder in Iowa by introducing a potential conflict between the permit's limitations and the individual's perceived need for self-defense in a situation that may not strictly align with the permit's intended scope. The core difficulty lies in interpreting the boundaries of the permit and acting ethically and legally when faced with a subjective threat assessment. Careful judgment is required to avoid overstepping the legal authority granted by the permit or misinterpreting the conditions under which it is valid. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves strictly adhering to the terms and conditions of the Iowa non-resident professional permit to carry weapons. This means recognizing that the permit is issued for specific professional purposes and does not grant a general right to carry a weapon for personal defense in all situations, especially when off-duty and not engaged in the professional activity for which the permit was granted. The permit holder must understand that Iowa law, specifically relating to carrying weapons, dictates when and where a permit is valid. If the permit is tied to a specific profession and its duties, carrying the weapon outside of those duties, even if feeling threatened, could be a violation. The ethical imperative is to act within the bounds of the law and the authority granted, prioritizing de-escalation and seeking lawful assistance over the immediate use of a weapon outside the permit's scope. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming the permit grants broad personal protection rights, even when off-duty and not engaged in professional duties. This misinterprets the nature of a professional permit, which is typically tied to the responsibilities and risks associated with a specific occupation. Legally, this could lead to charges for carrying a weapon without proper authorization in a given context. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for the legal framework governing the permit. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on a subjective feeling of being threatened to justify carrying a weapon outside the permit's stipulated professional context. A personal safety is important. The legal right to carry a weapon is regulated. This approach fails to acknowledge that the permit's validity is conditional and not a blanket authorization for self-defense in any circumstance. It prioritizes personal perception over legal compliance, which is a significant ethical and legal failing. A third incorrect approach is to attempt to quantify the perceived threat using a personal risk assessment formula that is not recognized or sanctioned by Iowa law or the terms of the permit. For example, calculating a threat index based on factors like distance, perceived intent, and environmental conditions does not supersede the explicit limitations of the permit. This is an attempt to create a personal justification that has no legal standing and ignores the established regulatory framework. It is both legally and ethically unsound. Professional reasoning. Professionals operating under specific permits, such as the Iowa non-resident professional permit to carry weapons, must adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves a thorough understanding of the permit's scope, limitations, and the relevant Iowa statutes governing the carrying of weapons. When faced with a situation that might trigger a perceived need to carry a weapon outside the permit's explicit professional context, the professional should 1. Immediately assess if the current situation falls within the defined professional duties for which the permit was issued. 2. If the situation is outside the professional scope, the weapon should not be carried, or if already carried, should be secured in a manner that complies with Iowa law for non-permit holders. 3. Prioritize de-escalation techniques and seek assistance from law enforcement if a threat is perceived. 4. Consult legal counsel or relevant authorities if there is any ambiguity regarding the permit's applicability. This systematic approach ensures that actions are always grounded in legal authority and ethical responsibility, preventing potential legal repercussions and upholding professional integrity.